Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Narina McKeegan, Assistant Vice President and Chair of the Los Angeles Regional Consortium. Thank you for joining today's presentation. We're really excited for the opportunity for you to learn about the California Community College's Chancellor's Office Student Employment Outcomes, California Landscape Analysis. The long title, I know. It is really important for us to align our work to the research and to improve student learning outcomes as well as employment outcomes and ensure career mobility, as both are a focus for the Vision for Success and the Governor's Recovery with Equity. So our collective mission at the LARC, as you all know, which comprises of the LA 19 colleges, is to bridge the gap between LA's workforce and the employers fueling our cutting-edge economy. We know that this will not only close the supply and demand gap, but it will also increase economic and social mobility for LA County residents. So as we begin to do this work, we know that the LA 19 colleges collectively are stronger together. So our regional priorities to ensure we support student learning outcomes and career mobility are to coordinate and braid services and funding for advancing career mobility, to really establish a robust framework to encourage employer participation in our region, more specifically sub-regions to meet local employer needs, and to utilize data-driven narratives and implementation strategies to demonstrate our effectiveness and to guide decision-making by truly focusing on student success and their employment outcomes. So the Chancellor's Office has engaged in research initiatives to better understand national and state landscape of student employment outcomes for community college learners. We are pleased to have Dr. Barbara Endel, as well as Principal and co-lead Maggie Snyder for this project, who will be sharing their research findings with us. We appreciate their time and their expertise in presenting to our region today. Welcome, Dr. Endel and Maggie. The floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. We've been really waiting for this moment for a while. The district and the work that you all represent is just near and dear to our hearts. Big fan of the certainly the district. So together with my colleague Maggie Snyder, we are two researchers that had been attained by the Chancellor's Office to really do a deep dive into student employment outcomes. And that is that kind of that bridge between when college is completed, kind of life after college, and what does the job situation look like? So we have a great agenda for you today. And with that, Maggie, let me have you introduce yourself as well.
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. I'm Maggie Snyder. I will be, I supported Barbara, Dr. Endel on this research, and I will be sharing some of our findings later on in the conversation. I will also be sharing my screen, excuse me, with the presentation. Barbara, whenever you're ready, I'm ready to do that.
Yeah, let's go. Let's dive in, Maggie. Great. So together with Maggie, we have had a chance to touch base with all of the regional consortium chairs, and you have been assembled so that we could share the findings from our research and have a really good discussion with you about what we found with our national literature review on student employment outcomes, and then the work that we did in California across several institutions to document what sort of student employment outcomes and what did that structure and landscape look like. So really for us, the outcomes for today are to connect with you on our findings. And then also we know that with the planning that you're doing this next year, it's a very important time with strong workforce and with Perkins. And so we really think that this will help you identify regional priorities and action plans, and we hope provide a great evidence base to reflect the work you're doing. So it's really a pretty simple agenda. We would love to share some and discuss our research findings, and then we have some touch points along the way to engage in a discussion with you. This is the kind of work where I wish we had all afternoon to kind of dig in, So we will do the best we can, knowing this is a big group. So also, Maggie, please help me with the chat if I miss anything. Yes, and the PowerPoint will be made available after this is finished. Okay, so here is our big picture, and I feel that I wonder what you think, because I do feel like that in many ways this is the current state, where at the beginning of the journey, when community colleges were initially developed, enrollment drove funding. It still does. We know that. It's an important element. We know that. At the beginning of the 2000s, we do know that student success and completion also was elevated in terms of need. When I was at a foundation in the early 2000s, we joined Lumina Foundation with their Achieving the Dream initiative, which was really one of the first times student success was put front and center. And I think together with the work you're doing, it's made a big difference. And now when you think about that continuum with students and their transition into the labor market, I just think this is a very underrepresented piece of the puzzle that community colleges do really good work in, and also where there are some gaps. So what we're going to focus on now is that career piece at the end, and talk a little bit about some of the evidence and outcomes we found from a national lit review, and then what we found with interviews across California community colleges. So we had three parts of this project. I just mentioned a national landscape where we looked at data and hard evidence. We then took time over a 6-month period or so to do key interviews, and Maggie will explain a lot more about what that looked like. And then what we also did is had some terrific strategic direction meetings with many stakeholders, including your regional consortium chair and that group, and got some really good information and thoughts about what this looked like. But for us today, it's really about getting your best thinking on the implications from these findings and what's resonating with your work locally in LA. So when we first think about this work, I think that the direction that the Chancellor's office is shifting toward, that I know you all really believe in, is this sense about, yes, it's workforce development, but it's also about career mobility. And that saying to ourselves, colleges have an empowered role in helping develop career mobility while students are with you, and to help jumpstart their career mobility when they leave you. So here what we have is, I won't read all of these, but you can kind of get a sense that, you know, the traditional way that we've thought about career mobility, it has been with sort of thinking about how do you move up that ladder. But now we have a much greater sense about agency and resetting and reskilling, and providing career mobility with students to have the agility to navigate a more complex economic market than ever before. So next slide, we'll also talk a little bit about the lens we brought to the research. So we know that things like your work-based learning opportunities, internships, apprenticeships, access to social capital and meeting employers, all of those things are really what we consider an opportunity structure. And this is something that deals with equity. And we tried to look at it around the implication of how is it that some students are able to move in and through opportunity structures while others are not. And so we took a look at and asked several questions about disaggregated data and impact of different opportunities for students on campus. So we're eager to share those with you here in a moment. So I'd like to very briefly review our national landscape analysis findings, and then we can have a really quick discussion. Then we'll get into what the work with California. So we had 4 key findings that emerged from our national landscape. And here you can see what those are. And for us, finding number 2 and finding number 3 really tended to resonate across California when we've been talking to folks like you doing this important work. And we do know that regional economic disparities impact lifetime earnings. So for example, we know that if you have distressed communities, that connecting in that community to the economic market may in fact be cycling the same structural inequities that we saw in the work. And then finding number 3 is something that Burning Glass Technologies, a really important data firm, produced reports around saying that when college students complete what they start with their learning, this isn't about the jobs they're working at when they're in college, but then when they do transition into that first job, 43% are underemployed. And when doing resume scraping and other analyses that they've, Burning Glass found that with those 43%, even 5 and 10 years later, if you're underemployed, you're likely to stay underemployed. And that was true for women and also students of color. So we know that that student's first job is the most critical. So, and then obviously with finding number 4, this is something California is leading the nation in, and that is experiential learning and work-based learning. So Maggie, next slide. So let's take a few minutes and get your best thinking. What resonated the most from those brief 4 national findings, and then we will hit up California. So any sort of thing that struck you, we can open the floor for a few minutes. Cody, go ahead.
Hi, just to clarify, the first job, that's referring to post-graduation, correct?
That's correct.
Graduation, okay.
Because we know, I mean, we've had the discussion before. We know students are working
Right.
1, 2, sometimes 3 jobs while they're in school. This is really related to their program of study or their certificate, and that entry-level job, that first job, if it's related to that when they do hit the job market.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, good question. Thank you. Any other clarifying questions? You're a very quiet group. We're not used to this. Okay, Maggie, let's dig into California. I think this will also, I hope, create good comments and good thinking from the team.
Yeah, for sure. So yes, thank you again. Good afternoon. I'm Maggie. As Barbara mentioned, we started with our national scan, and then we sort of centered in on our California qualitative analysis. We selected 9 colleges from across the state through a purposeful sampling strategy. We really thought about the state's population demographics and other variables and outcomes that we pulled from Launchboard, use that information to select the final schools we reached out to participate in the interviews. We had more than 40 interviewees across those 9 colleges. Participants, covered a wide range of roles and functions. We really thought about, we interviewed presidents, deans, high-level administrators, but also sort of folks that work in career services, and faculty and staff. We then, from there, coded more than 1,000 interview segments using our qualitative software tool called MaxQDA. So from those sort of codes, we were able to identify findings that we'll talk about on the following couple of slides. I do want to say, you know, there are 116 colleges in community colleges in California. So we know that 9 colleges cannot be representative of the full diversity of the colleges in the state. But what we do really just want to reiterate here is that the findings presented on the following slides were not just from 1 or 2 colleges. They really kind of represent the scope of those 9 colleges. And we were intentional about, you know, demographics and geography. So while we know we can't be representative, we do think that, and we have seen in conversations with other regional stakeholders, that there are sort of lessons and findings that can be incorporated across all of the regions in the state. Okay, so Dr. Makajan already spoke to this, so we don't need to spend a ton of time here. But as we as we kind of talk about the findings on the next couple of slides, we would love if you all could keep in mind the priorities that were identified by your regional consortium leadership. And so again, these have already been spoken to, but just to reiterate, the priorities have been around coordinating and grading services and funding related to career mobility. Priority 2 was building a structure or strong foundation to facilitate employer engagement at the regional, and I also heard micro regional level in the comments today, so that's great. And then thirdly is really this sort of data storytelling and activation idea, which I think is really an exciting concept that your region has come up with, thinking about how to use data to make decisions that benefit students, but also not only sort of like collect and use, analyze information to make decisions, but also to tell the story of that impact over time to really benefit student success. I think that's a really sort of unique and interesting priority that I would love to talk more about with you all today. Okay, and I apologize. I'm in Philadelphia and we are having lots of spring, and so I have some allergies today. So thank you for my throat clearing. So within our report we had many more findings related to equity and data, but I wanted to tailor and present and talk about these top 3 with you all today because I think they're directly related with your region's priorities. So the first finding here, equity is variously defined and misunderstood. So this sort of reflects the varied ways that we heard respondents speaking about equity when we would interview them. We would ask them, our interviewees, you know, to share how they were addressing the needs of various student populations and whether data were used to assess differences in employment outcomes or uptake of services, things like that. And, you know, we really found a real variance in sort of populations of priority or not, but also sort of the way that administrators and staff were thinking about program delivery to different populations of equity in an equitable way. Just was really varied across campuses. And we know, you know, if equity isn't defined in the same way across a campus or even sort of a micro-region or region, then outcomes can't be measured or assessed in the same way. So there's some real, I think, data implications to that finding. Secondly, colleges that we spoke with, many lacked sort of structures and processes to enable college employees who focus on career mobility to actually integrate and use data to ensure that those employment outcomes are equitable. So, you know, firstly, sort of various definitions of equity are impacting outcomes, but also a lack of sort of, again, structure, processes, relational approach to equity seem to be missing, which, you know, could lead to a misunderstanding of student outcomes or, you know, an inability to sort of close some of these equity gaps that are really important to our campuses. And then finally, the colleges, and this was at every campus really, like colleges have different resources to access, analyze, and make decisions based on data. Capacity is different, you know, funding is different. And so that seems to be really important. And a second sort of implication of this is that even when colleges do have access to data and maybe could make decisions about it, there's not always the expertise on campus, or as you all have been talking about, this sort of data storytelling narrative component to actually show our work about why we're going through a continuous improvement plan or changing strategies to improve student success. So that's, a quick summary of some of our findings. I do have a discussion slide that I would love to get to, but I'm happy to hear any comments related to the data and equity, as well as the LARC priorities. But just sort of to tailor these discussion questions a little bit, if we want to get the conversation going, I think like we had a couple of questions around this data storytelling. So what could this high quality data storytelling allow you to do differently on campus to support students? And then of course, are there any new or modified data activity collection, analysis, decision-making activities that could support sort of action relevant to improving career mobility? So I'd love to just turn it over to you all for a few minutes. Happy to switch back and forth between any slides if you want to take a peek at the findings again, but love to turn it over to you to hear your thoughts. Yes, go ahead. No need to raise your hand, just jump in. Thank you.
I didn't want to, if somebody else was jumping in, because I can't see everybody, so I didn't want to just
Perfect.
step on somebody. So I had a question about when we're talking about equity and differential outcomes. If we're talking about the being able to collect the data that is a little bit more regional rather than college-based, because for me, I work at LHA Tech, and I also wrote and work on our C plan, our student equity and achievement plan. And I braid all of our funding with that plan as well. But for us, we're challenged with a situation where most of the times when we're talking about equity and comparing equity outcomes, we're usually comparing students of color with students not of color, and we don't have any white students. Well, we have some, but we have like, of 10,000, we have like, 378 or something like that. And so therefore it's challenging when your N is very small in your white population compared to your non-white population. So then what you end up looking at is weird, often idiosyncratic differences among BIPOC students, and that aren't very meaningful. So therefore, when we're talking about being able to capture some of these issues with equity, it would be great if we could look at it regionally more, so that there'd be a better comparisons than what we can do at our college, because most of us who are in larger colleges do have the capacity to do a lot of the equity data collection ourselves, but it's not as meaningful when we don't have that regional lens.
Yeah, I'll jump in. It's a really great point. And, I do think that we had this discussion earlier, and like trying to figure out a way to roll up some of the data in meaningful ways. Like there were a couple of the other regions where they talked about trying to revive their community of practice for their researchers or CTE folks, et cetera, to kind of get at that regional viewpoint. So Marcia, quick question. I mean, do you all, you get together across this forum, but do you end up, is there opportunity to essentially like look at data, both at your campus and regionally?
Not really. We have what the Chancellor's Office provides us, that they collected for our C program. And then we have the stuff that we just collect locally for our college, but not really regionally. And I believe that the state uses, that big data set. The one data set that is local is our data around whether or not enrollment matches our local population, and that just uses some census data from the census tracts that are in our service area. And not I could do that myself as well, but we don't really have anything that looks at employment regionally, just the enrollment piece.
Maybe that's something we could support structuring. I think some of those conversations, and like, how do you, yeah, like, so I think what we're trying to say is like, absolutely, yes. I do think taking a viewpoint at the regional level is a really sophisticated viewpoint to take, especially given the density in your area and your region. So I think we could definitely work with your regional chair to help sort of structure what that could look like.
Before I chime in, Barbara, I just want to turn it over to Dr. Bradford. He had his hand raised, and then I'll.
Thank you for that. Thank you also too for this research. I was noticing that it's mostly qualitative, but I was asking, who were the 40 interviewees? Because a lot of time we look for validity. And the question becomes, are these people that actually work in strong workforce or Perkins, or individuals who work in career centers? And then also too, I wanted to ask, because one of the strategies and structures, the first one was limited visibility of student employment outcomes or connections to the labor market. And of course, that's a big thing for me. How did you measure that? Was that just qualitative type of answers, or did you really pull some data, some concrete data to show, or did you review some data to bring you to this conclusion?
Yeah, so and Maggie can also help speak to that too. I would say that across the 40 interviewees, we had a very wide spectrum, everywhere from presidents to the career center director who had direct services with students, and folks in between, including faculty, CTE folks. Some were on main campus, some had kind of career centers, that were a little bit on the fringe of campuses. So I think that we really did speak to a wide group of folks, and to us, this was never designed to be a quantitative study. I mean, you all have the statistics from the college success performance standards, right? From Launch Board and other places. So this was really designed to get at a sense of how are student employment outcomes sort of structured on campuses, and what are the barriers, what are the opportunity structures. So that, together with the perspectives across the stakeholders, I think kept us close to these viewpoints and reflected these viewpoints.
Great. Thank you for that, Dr. Bradford. I just wanted to go back to Dr. Wilson's comment about regional data and employer engagement. What I do want to share is that LARC is working on a dashboard, and we do have a business analyst. So our goal is to really develop a task force, a community of practice, where all of this regional data can be collected from the 19 and be able to really identify the gaps and work together to make us stronger as a region. So that initiative is in place, and Barbara and Maggie, we would be happy to get input from you on how we should do this work in a more intentional way based on all of your data and your research that you've gathered through this landscape analysis. So thank you for that. And I think JB, and then also Dr. Young has a question.
Yes, hi, good afternoon, I believe. Yes, good afternoon, and thank you for this wonderful information. Usually when collecting data and analyzing and doing all of that, as you all know, where do the students' input get into this? Because in order for this to be valid, also the response of students after employment is very critical to this piece. Did you have a chance to look at that? Or do you have any insights on that? Thank you.
Yeah, so we did ask about that. In fact, we led with that to some degree. And the colleges that we were able to interview had various answers around students and the success and where they go, right, in the labor market. Some of the campuses use Job Speaker. I don't know if that's an element that any of you all use. Some of the campuses responded that students would have needed to have self-reported, where they ended up and if their credential was used if they were in field. Others tried to do a ton of outreach with students. I would say writ large that there weren't many campuses that were able to report a large number of a large percentage of students and being able to track them into the labor market that wasn't self-reported student data. And so it's a little bit unclear the success of students once they leave you. And so that would be something that, the 19 colleges here, you're really well positioned with the great leadership you have to start digging into that. And I would love to drop in a link before we leave today. Harvard School of Education also just released a great report about sort of life after college and the limited amount of data and understanding we have when students do leave us. So it's a really good question, and I think there's not a good answer because there isn't consistent data produced.
So there isn't like a consistent follow-up system that, is part of the, the educational journey. So once we give them the degree and they go, it's up to the student to come back and tell us.
Yes.
That's it. I just wanted to say that.
Yes, great. That absolutely. I will say just the one caveat, which I think we all know about, but just to say out loud is the unemployment insurance information and, using sources such as Burning Glass or I guess Lightcast and Experian, those sorts of subscription services. But on that side, it's very delayed information. So I think what's missing is non-self-reported timely information in order to really make quicker decisions. But that's a great call out.
Yeah, for sure. Dr. Young.
Yeah, that was part of my same question as well. I know that student data is hard to get at, and I would say employer data is even more difficult to get at because of the firewall between employers as well in terms of protecting their sensitive HR information. I've done this work before in the past, but it was part of a DOE grant so that we could actually trace quarter earnings by participants who voluntarily signed up. So we got a better reporting out of that. Not sure if that's something that this region would be willing to do to actually get more timely, more accurate information, because when we did DOE, we had direct access to EDD data in terms of EDD wage data, as well as what quarters they were employed. So we were able to actually say what industry and if they had, what were their quarterly earnings or participants. The only thing that we offered as a nominal reward to students was essentially a free textbook, right? So it was, in terms of enrollment registration, or criteria for a voucher for a free textbook to help them along with their program of studies. But it did yield good data in terms of us being able to track a cohort of students across 10 community colleges that participated in terms of looking at their outcomes in a specific region.
Thank you. I think that's a really great point and something to certainly add to the list of priorities and come together around. I think that would be really terrific.
And I think there was a question in the chat. Our time, we checked, I think we checked every quarter afterwards, and we actually had a person who was responsible for collecting data and looking into the consortium's data selection in terms of students who participated, who didn't participate, and then looking at quarterly earnings after program completion dates, so that we were not trying to, we wanted to actually get accurate research in terms of having the dates that students actually complete the program and then looking at earnings afterwards, as opposed to looking at all students, Because if we looked at all students, we would be falsely representing those students who were still in training's employment data, as opposed to looking at those who completed programs. We did capture information at the time of enrollment in terms of students who are already working, those that participated, so we could see increases. If they increase, see net increase as well. So it was a pretty good model to collect regional employment data. And this is just limited to one sector, unfortunately. I think if we did it as a region, looking at across all our CT programs, I think we get a much richer group of students and data set.
Yeah, great point. So, and I see just a question from Luke Meyer in the chat as well, asking, in your national research, did you come across any model states that have timely and accurate reporting on student employment outcomes? Barbara, I would say no.
Right.
Okay, no, unfortunately, we did not. Tanisha Laney.
Yes, I just wanted to just say thank you to Dr. Young, and also that we do have that information available on the Chancellor's Office website. The issue, it's not an issue, but it's always going to be delayed because, like what Dr. Young mentioned, is that we want to wait until students have exited the community college system before we start tracking their income. So that information is available, and it is available regionally as well. And the great thing is that we can see this information disaggregated by ethnicity. So we can see the gaps in income levels between different ethnic groups.
Great. Thank you, Tanisha. Any other comments before we move on to the last set of findings? Really good questions.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay. We can keep talking about data inequity as well. We have another discussion point after these couple of findings as well. So, so our other sort of set of key findings was around strategy. So how did career mobility and sort of student employment factor into sort of college strategy publicly, but also internally? And then portfolios of services related to career outcomes, which we're thinking beyond, career services is an important component of that, but there are so many other sort of people and departments and factors that are working on that. So that's what we mean by sort of portfolio here. So our first finding, career-related services are varied, obviously, with personnel largely focused on their specific intervention with little coordination across campus, which I don't think is surprising. I'm seeing some nods. So folks are doing great work, I think, in pockets on campuses, absolutely, 100%. But it wasn't necessarily a coordinated effort across any of the campuses, maybe a couple, but that we spoke with. So for example, maybe, especially I think faculty, folks who work on sort of more of the academic side, who have these great employer connections, maybe aren't always plugged into a career service center's strategies around, work-based learning, for example. And then secondly, and I just thought this was important, is related to sort of the priorities of your region, is sort of this social capital component, which is building strong relationships on campus. Like, students are definitely building strong relationships on campus for sure, and that's great. But it doesn't seem to be systemic. It's not a systemic practice. It's happening sort of, again, in pockets, and seems to be more driven by student or staff sort of personalities or achievement in the classroom, rather than structured by design to really help connect, everyone in my classroom to some sort of what work-based learning opportunity or employer engagement opportunity or something else. And so there seems to be an opportunity for the campuses to consider how to sort of structure this social capital, which community colleges are so great at, in a more systemic and equitable way. So happy to dive into these findings. I do want to flash our discussion questions up here quickly as well, which is, your regional consortium really wants to build this structure to facilitate employer engagement at a regional level. So with these findings in mind, sort of what needs to change, or what could be changed to augment that strategy. And then also thinking about sort of coordinating and braiding funding and services, which have come up in our slides, but also in our conversation today. How can sort of these campus silos be broken down to really support this work of coordination and braiding, particularly of funding and services? So again, this is our last discussion slide. This is sort of our last hurrah here. We're open to going back to the equity and data discussion questions as well, but would love to turn it over to you all.
I'm sorry, Norini, go ahead.
No problem. I don't want to put Dr. Wilson on the spot, but her team did an excellent presentation at the CCCCO conference this past week. So I don't know, Dr. Wilson, if you want to share, and she's done an excellent job leading a team and talk about like breaking that in silos and really putting students at the forefront of every decision. So sorry to put you on the spot.
So I want to thank Narineh and her team, Ruth and JB, who showed up at our presentation in the CCCAOE conference. But I think that one of the things that's really important in terms of creating that culture is recognizing that it really does start as a relational culture, and even though we haven't formally been doing job placement and connecting students with jobs systemically as a community college, because like you guys pointed out in the beginning, everything and funding and everything was based on enrollment. And then kind of what happens after they walk the stage and you hand them that, that little folder that may or may not have a degree in it, you didn't really worry about, right? Because you're just hoping the students got jobs. And now that we're kind of responsible for making sure that students get jobs and we're kind of held accountable to that, now things have shifted. But faculty have been doing it for many, many years, particularly in our CTE areas where they have connections to industry. And yet it was always very informal, and they did it to the degree to which they had the time and the wherewithal and concern to do it. So it wasn't systemic, but what we found is that we couldn't ignore the fact that they did do it. And so we had to come in with the perspective of that those relationships that people form with employers are personal, and sometimes they don't want to have you ruin them and overwhelm their employer partners, which that are their friends and their colleagues, and sometimes even people that they still do business with, and you want to be able to respect that. So what we talked about in our presentation was really looking at engaging the faculty with the team that is doing job placement, and really honoring and utilizing and augmenting and assisting that role that faculty play with employers. And then also connecting all employers, even the new ones you get that they didn't have connections with, to your faculty, so that because it strengthens curriculum, it strengthens the alignment and the good feelings that employers have with your programs of study, if they can actually feel that they know the people training their future workforce. And so we really had a great time building this over the last year and a half. We took our regional strong workforce regional grant, but also really made a local investment from our local strong workforce, also Perkins, and then we were fortunate enough to receive a Bank of America Jobs Initiative grant that was supposed to help Black and Brown students get placed in high wage jobs. And so with all that, we were able to build a team. I'm just, trying to now plan, what am I going to do in 5 years, to make sure that I get to maintain that team. But once you set up systems, I think that it becomes less expensive and more about something that the college is willing to invest in once you can show that return on investment. So, it was a great opportunity to share, but I really want to stress that your faculty and the faculty role that they could play in helping in this.
Great. It looks like Dr. Bradford, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to make I wanted to be a cheerleader for being intentional. 15 years ago, I was on a campus where we were approached by Cedars-Sinai for our CNA program. And through a Department of Labor grant with USC and LA City College, we were able to get folks through one semester in our CNA program, and they were hired directly by Cedars-Sinai. To me, when I look at the allied health and when I look at the technology sectors, a lot of us have our own relationships with the Apples and the AWSs and the Microsofts, but I don't know if we ever thought about this approach at the regional level. Why aren't we at the regional level? Because we know what the dollars are coming in. Why aren't we pushing to develop those relationships so then that the other community colleges can then benefit that want to come into that sector? It seems to me it's a lot of piecemeal. And Narnay, I'm not trying to create more work for you.
Oh, no,
Or the group.
Dr. Bradford, we're already doing it.
Okay, my bad.
Thanks for sharing
Yeah, because
that.
to me, it's like if I can get those people, at the table and to say, look, we're looking to hire X number of individuals. How many institutions want to get involved? How many students can you train? How many quickly can they get hired? And I think that that's a big selling point, especially at a school like Los Angeles Southwest College, where we're in an economically depressed community, where we know that the rent moratorium is about to expire, the utility moratorium is about to expire. We're looking at the way the economy is looking right now. That type of training for those type of jobs, once students start to see that they're getting hired, others will come, others will follow. And so the equity issues will start going by the wayside. So you can tell I'm fired up about this, because for me, it's like, if I can get those employers to kind of say, we want to make a commitment to you guys, then it's on us. It's on us to do the heavy lifting.
Absolutely. Agreed. That is definitely our goal at the regional level, is to bring in all of these large, small, and local hyper-focused employers, and really to have them see that our community colleges are a solution to their gaps, their talent gaps and their skill gaps, and how we can align really intentionally, as you said, Dr. Bradford, to the strength of our community colleges that have programs that align with their needs. And so that is definitely our goal, because we don't want to send any employer to 19 colleges to try to figure it out by themselves, but we want to have dialogue and be able to strategically make and help cultivate those relationships to ultimately ensure that our students are placed within those positions. So yes, we agree with you.
JB, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to just say, thanks, Maggie. You know, looking at this first discussion question, one of the things we did uncover was the strong work that so many of the colleges are doing around internships. And it's very interesting. I'm wondering what sort of agency at the regional level, or could you work toward this, where some of the colleges had required internships or built those into the guided pathway. And I'm wondering if that would ever be anything, you know, Narnia and team, like, of thinking about, could we build in internships writ large across the programs? You know, there are other states like Florida, for example, who the community colleges are required to offer every student an internship. And it's under state law regulation that those need to be paid internships, which is a really interesting systemic way to ensure employers are engaged and you're connecting students to their field of study. But wondered about internships and that sort of structure piece that you mentioned.
And I also want to say, JB, you've had your hand raised, so I don't, if whether it's that to address this question or other, just please go ahead.
That's okay. Noreen and I, you know, I'm the business engagement and partnership coordinator for the LARC. So I guess whatever I need to ask Noreen is, you know, we're on the same page. But I just wanted initially to commend Dr. Wilson, because it was so refreshing, and you can braid all the money you want and programs in the world, unless there's a culture shift and an agreement on the inside that, we need to do this and move together our student employment. And I'm very big in moving, into bigger things that all students need to be case managed instead of just being counseled, to be able to build relationships that will last after they get, their degree. But that's a bigger conversation for a different time. Also regarding the internships, and I'll let Dr. McKeegan talk on that. We have dabbled into this, and I want to say successfully, with one of the employers to bring forth architect, construction and engineering paid internships for a large employer. And I will let Narina talk a little bit more about it.
Yes, to answer your question, we are regionally looking at definitely our priorities, industry priorities, and making alignment with our programs and getting feedback from our colleges to see where they have challenges in placing students so that we can help to bring in opportunities of work-based learning and, internships. And now we're really trying to scale our apprenticeship programs within the region with all of the initiatives and funding coming down from the state as well. So yes, we are working on that. And as JB mentioned, as part of our employer engagement plan, what we do is we really try to connect our employers to colleges that have programs, and more importantly, have programs that actually have talent that are graduating or completing and have the skill sets necessary for that employer. So we are kind of going full circle with that. And we just started as a regional consortium about a year and a couple months ago. So we're really working to scale that within LA County. And we have really excellent partnerships and employers who are wanting and willing to engage with us. So we are very fortunate. And yes, externships as well. Thank you for mentioning that too. But hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you. Cody, you have your hand up?
Sure. I just wanted what I saw, just to point out, it was interesting in your findings, how you said across your research, across multiple campuses, how the career-related services are varied, really varied, and there's little coordination. And so that speaks volumes to the gap and the need for this, right? Because there's not a cohesive effort across all campuses right now. And that's evident by your findings. And so I just think it's really interesting how you also mentioned too, how, the funding and structure is focused on enrollment, right? And then retention. And then now it should be shifting to, gainful employment, right? So it shouldn't just stop at retention, right? And so we're kind of scrambling, kind of scattered for this gainful employment and career services piece, but that should be like the final end goal for campuses now going forward. So there's definitely a need for this. So I'm looking forward to seeing where this goes.
Very well said. I loved I like your thinking. Any other questions or comments? Maggie, maybe you can bring us back together.
Yes, sure.
Thank you. So give me like a thumbs up. I know many of you have your cameras turned off. You can do your things like, was this helpful? And we hope would help drive some of the planning and thinking as you move forward. And so we'll definitely make sure you get this PowerPoint. And, I just really love the leadership Narnia has and with the team and the work you're doing. So good. I see some like thumbs up. That's good. So I'll turn it over to you, Dr. M.
I have a quick question. So is the data specific for CTE programs? And if there are equity gaps, is that because of over participation in certain CTE programs that yield low wage? Is that something that we've looked at? Because that may explain some of the equity gap in terms of participation, whether you look at 4-year data in terms of graduation for 4-year colleges, in terms of equity gaps, in terms of employment data and outcome data and wage data. If there's an overrepresentation in those professions that yield lower wages, you're going to potentially see an equity gap. Anecdotally, I can say that is probably true among the healthcare programs as well. Those programs that have a longer onboarding generally have it's a self-selective process. Can you afford to be out of work that long in terms of afford to be able to go to education, educational route? Have we looked at that across our CTE program portfolios to see who's participating and the level of participation? And even once they participate, is there an equity gap of the program completers among ethnic as potentially and gender lines and gender identification?
Yeah, there's a lot wrapped up in your questions. So, and comments, which I think are spot on. And it's very interesting where if some of the questions, so it tilted more towards CTE and somewhat student support services, career services, but many of the interviews included CIOs, faculty members, deans of different academic programs. So I think we had a pretty good set of voices talking about the work of students getting jobs once they finish whatever program. And it's very interesting where we did ask that question about, how do you measure equity, or how do you know what you're doing is resulting in the kind of impact you want? And, I said, for example, in a typical interview, they would mention interviews or apprenticeships or some of the social capital building or networking. And when we said, okay, then do you happen to know if the students who are participating in internships, what is that representation? Does it include students of color, women, et cetera? And then second, are the participants in the internship programs any more or less successful than students who don't participate? And it was a little bit baffling to us that several colleges said, oh, that's a really good question. We should really add that to our list and disaggregate the data. And so I think that drawing attention to the important questions that you posed, Dr. Young, are exactly what this region and the others, I think, are really starting to think more firmly about, if that makes sense. Maggie, anything to add to that?
No, I think you covered it.
Yeah, good points.
Absolutely.
All right, Dr. M, to you.
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge Dr. Andrew Jonas is one of the co-chairs on our CEO board. Thank you for being on the call, and it's with her support and also Dr. Mary Gallagher's support that LARC is really thriving. Andrew Jonas.
Hi, no, thank you. I couldn't join you until 12:30, so I've just sort of been here in the background and listening to the discussion and the information. And as a 9-year CTE dean and very invested in economic and workforce development, I love hearing all the discussion. And of course, I know Dr. Wilson's wonderful work from when I was in the LACCD, so it's great to see her approach as a model, and just really appreciate the dialogue. And of course, I appreciate the fact that we continue to talk about how important these things are, student employment, getting those numbers. And I think as we keep talking about what we need, talking about the barriers, I think that's how we finally come to conclusions or come up with ways to get that information in a more timely manner, especially as all of our colleges are really pushed to show success in this area, especially with the student-centered funding formula.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. We hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Barbara and Maggie, for joining our regional meeting and sharing your research analysis. We will share all the documents and information with the region and look forward to further dialogue around this. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Good afternoon.